Hello, wonderful staff at the Northwest Kidney Center, particularly the flagship unit in Kent, with a shout out to our friends at the two units in Federal Way. Today we're going to talk about ethical issues in organ transplantation. As you all know, organ donation is a wonderful gift, and one of the best parts of my job is seeing one of my patients receive a kidney transplant. But no treatment, of course, is perfect. And in the dialysis world, I think it's important to be familiar with the ethical issues associated with transplantation. These have been present ever since the first transplant attempts in the 1950s, and at root of this is the shortage of human organs. There are just not enough organs available for transplantation. Now, the reason I chose to talk about this today is because of the recent report by the Health and Human Services on the organ procurement process, which revealed significant flaws in the United States regarding harvesting of organs. Additionally, outside of this country, there are major problems with organ harvesting. And while there is widespread abuse in the transplant world outside of this country, I don't want to leave you with the impression from this video that the same is true in the United States. Yes, there are some U.S. transplant programs that have engaged in unethical practices, and these are being addressed. But at least in the Seattle area, we are incredibly fortunate to work with three excellent and highly ethical programs: University of Washington, Swedish, and Virginia Mason. So please don't think that our local programs are anything less than stellar. The purpose of this video is rather to raise awareness that there is potential for abuse of unethical practice when it comes to kidney donation. Today's talk has three objectives. We'll discuss the recent Health and Human Services report regarding donation violations in the United States. We'll review ethical issues regarding trafficking of human body parts and what is known as transplant tourism, and acknowledge non-consensual removal of organs in countries such as China. Let's begin with the discussion of organ donation in the United States. In the United States, organs for kidney transplantation come from either living donors who voluntarily donate a kidney to someone or from deceased donors. A deceased donor is a person who has reached something called brain death, which is actually not the same thing as death. Death occurs when your heart stops beating and your lungs stop breathing, so a cardiovascular death. But once a person has died, you only have several minutes in order to remove their organs if they're going to be transplanted. Waiting until someone has died to consider them as a transplant donor would make transplantation a very rare occurrence. So how did the pioneers of organ transplantation deal with this issue? In 1968, a group of physicians at Harvard defined the concept of brain death, also known as irreversible coma. Brain death is a permanent, irreversible, and complete loss of cerebral and brainstem function. It differs from persistent vegetative state in which the person is alive and has some autonomic functions. It also is distinct from coma, in which some brain and bodily activity and function remain. Brain death can be diagnosed by neurologic examination under certain conditions, specifically in the absence of drug intoxication, poisoning, hypothermia, or metabolic derangements. The neurologic examination should demonstrate an absence of brain-generated response to external stimuli and an absence of brainstem reflexes such as gag or cough. Through various legislation in the 1970s and 1980s, brain death was ultimately adopted by both the legal and medical communities as a legal definition of death, allowing a person to be declared legally dead even if maintained on life support. Once a person has reached brain death in this country, without waiting for cardiovascular death, his or her organs can legally be donated to other people. It is of utmost importance to apply criteria for brain death rigorously and precisely if someone is being considered for organ donation. Unfortunately, errors in this process have occurred. In 2021, a notable donation case occurred in Kentucky where a patient named T.J. Hoover was declared brain dead but showed signs of life, such as crying and moving, and woke up during the organ harvesting preparations, leading to halting of the procedure. This case prompted an investigation by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services of the organ donation system in this country regarding how organs are donated, how they are matched and transplanted. The investigations have focused on both the organ procurement and transplantation network as well as organ procurement organizations that collect and distribute organs. The Health Resources and Service Administration, or HRSA, which is a subdivision of Health and Human Services, published their findings in July of 2025, so just last month. They examined 351 cases where organ donation was authorized, but ultimately not completed. And they found 103 cases, or 29%, showing concerning features, including 73 of the patients had neurologic signs incompatible with organ donation, and at least 28 patients may not have been deceased at the time organ procurement was initiated. In other words, they were still alive. The probe uncovered systemic failures such as inadequate neurologic assessments, poor communication with medical teams, questionable consent procedures, and misclassification of causes of death, particularly when it came to overdoses. Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. of the Health and Human Services called the findings horrifying, emphasized the sanctity of donor life, and vowed accountability for organ procurement organizations. Various reforms have been implemented, such as requiring checklists for staff and creating educational materials and training on protocol adherence. Needless to say, this report was published by media organizations, and most people were shocked and highly concerned about their findings. For example, on July 20th, 2025, the New York Times published an article entitled, "A Push for More Organ Transplant is Putting Donors at Risk." And I'll just quote a little excerpt from the article. In New Mexico, a woman was subjected to days of preparation for donation, even after her family said that she seemed to be regaining consciousness, which she eventually did. In Florida, a man cried and bit on his breathing tube, but was still withdrawn from life support. In West Virginia, doctors were appalled when coordinators asked a paralyzed man coming off sedatives in an operating room for consent to remove his organs. But then the New York Times provoked even more controversy by publishing an editorial on July 30th, 2025, recommending loosening the criteria for brain death. The title of the article, "Donor Organs Are Too Rare, We Need a New Definition of Brain Death," and it was written by 3 New York cardiologists. Their solution was to loosen criteria for organ donation from whole brain death to higher brain death. In other words, broaden the definition of brain death to include irreversibly comatose patients on life support. In other words, if you're in a coma that we think is irreversible, then we can harvest your organs. Needless to say, there was a lot of backlash against this suggestion. The main concern with this proposal is that loosening the criteria for brain death would allow organ harvesting from individuals with some remaining brain function, which is a euphemism for still being alive. This could potentially erode public trust in organ donation and, ironically, negatively impact organ donation by decreasing willingness to donate. So far, this has been the public response. According to the Association of Organ Procurement Organizations, the New York Times coverage has caused thousands of Americans to remove themselves from state and national registries. Donate Life in America, a nonprofit managing a national registry, reported a 700% increase in donor registration removals, with an average of 412 per day since the article's publication. This surge in withdrawals is described by the AOPO as the largest in the history of organ donation in the U.S. And while the exact impact on all state registries isn't fully documented, some states have reported thousands of removals, over 2,400 in California, 950 in Florida, and more than 600 in Colorado. In summary, while we love transplantation for our patients, failure to adhere to the rules of organ donation can create fear among those considering organ donation and a nightmare for organ donation in this country. Let's now discuss organ donation outside of the United States, where problems are much more serious. Outside of the United States, ethical violations are much worse. Human trafficking is a ubiquitous problem and includes more than just sexual exploitation. It includes kidnapping people for the purpose of harvesting their organs or coercing people to sell their organs. Should we allow people to legally sell their organs? Most of us, including the World Health Organization, say no. The arguments in favor are often utilitarian, focusing on the ends, including the life saved and the poverty purportedly alleviated. Some note that an urge to survive drives the market, as buyers want to survive disease and sellers want to survive poverty. But some suggest that individuals living in poverty are really unable to freely consent to selling an organ due to their economic condition, as generally it's those individuals who would sell an organ for money. Generally, wealthy individuals did not sell their organs. And allowing people to sell their organs is ripe for creating a system of abuse and coercion and encourages something called transplant tourism. Transplant tourism is a natural outgrowth of the illegal organ trade. It involves traveling to another country and receiving a transplant, generally from someone coerced or paid for their organ. People from wealthy countries engage in transplant tourism, paying large fees, which in turn feed a system of brokers, and use kidney hunters to prey upon the local poor. It represents about 10% of organ transplants. In addition to preying upon the poor, it can deprive the host countries of organs to use for local people in need of organ transplant. It's lucrative for the host country, allows people facing long waiting times in wealthy countries to have transplants sooner. Transplant tourism is alive and well in many countries, including Nepal and India, where there is significant poverty, which has led to the exploitation by organ trafficker of residents who have been duped into selling kidney for minimal pay. Organs are often transplanted in hospitals in neighboring India, which is a hub for illegal organ trade. Philippines were formerly a top country for transplant tourism. They attract foreign patients to purchase kidney from its poor citizens. The regulations were tightened in 2008, but weaknesses in oversight have allowed the trade to continue. In Pakistan, illegal organ trafficking ring was uncovered in 2023, having stolen kidneys from more than 300 people. It was run by a doctor-led gang operating in private homes, luring vulnerable people from hospitals and selling their kidneys for thousands of dollars. Interestingly, Iran is the only country that allows the legal sale of kidneys for compensation, but reports indicate that a system has created state-sanctioned market that exploits the poor. There is a thriving online black market and trafficking of foreign nationals. And in 2024, a transnational ring was exposed for harvesting organs from Iraqi and Iranian nationals. In Egypt, poverty and inadequate healthcare infrastructure have made Egypt a hub for illicit organ trade. Refugees from conflict zones have been particularly vulnerable to organ trafficking. Ever since 2000, trafficking networks have shifted towards Eastern Europe. In the early 2000s, dozens of Moldovan men were trafficked to Turkey to have kidneys removed. A transplant tourism scheme involving patients from Israel and donors from Moldova and other Eastern European countries was reported around 2008. Additionally, Latin America has become an increasing source for organ trafficking in multiple countries, including Mexico, Costa Rica, and Guatemala. But no country has engaged in more unethical transplantation than China. China performs more transplants than any country in the world. As a point of reference, all transplant centers in the United States combined have performed an average of 6,000 liver transplants annually since 2000. But this figure can be matched by just a few hospitals in China. Since 2005, Chinese government spokesmen have claimed that the vast majority of organs have come from death row prisoners and later from voluntary donations. And yet China does not have a robust voluntary organ donation program, in part because Chinese tradition requires that bodies remain whole after death. China did not start piloting organ donation systems until 2010, and a national system was not established until 2013. Nevertheless, by 2015, it still had not produced donations on a meaningful scale. So where do the organs come from? Multiple groups have been targeted in China for involuntary organ donation, in particular prisoners. In December 2025, Chinese Deputy Health Minister acknowledged that the practice of removing organs from executed prisoners for transplant was widespread. As many as 95% of all transplants in China derive from these executions. Generally, organ harvesting from executed prisoners is seen as coercive and not voluntary. In 2015, China banned the practice of harvesting organs from prisoners, but this was thought to be a sleight of hand because at the same time they then reclassified prisoners as citizens. Religious groups have also been targeted for organ donation. Falun Gong is a Buddhist and Taoist practice that includes spiritual teachings, meditations, and Qigong exercises that became popular in China in the 1990s. The People's Republic of China holds that Falun Gong is illegal. And because of its illegality, many Falun Gong practitioners have been imprisoned. In 2006, allegations emerged that many Falun Gong practitioners had been killed to supply China's organ transplant industry. An estimated 60 to 100,000 transplants took place from 2000 to 2014, during which time the primary victims were Falun Gong practitioners. Other groups targeted in China include Tibetans, Muslims, and Christians. Ethnic minorities have also been targeted in China for involuntary organ donation, particularly the Uyghurs. They are a Turkish ethnic group originating in China. Over 1 million have been imprisoned in camps on either false charges or for no reason at all, along with people of other Turkish ethnicity, heritage, and Muslim denominations. Biometric data has been collected on all these people, including blood type and other data needed for transplantation. So basically, the Chinese government has a large pool of potential donors who are incarcerated. In December 2018 and April of 2019, the Independent Tribunal into Forced Organ Harvesting from Prisoners of Conscience in China convened to evaluate whether China engaged in criminal activity in its organ harvesting practice. And their report was published in 2000 and revealed significant evidence, such as phone calls and witnesses, that hospitals were offering organs for sale, and in some cases openly admitted the organs were from prisoners. An expert witness indicated that organs from prisoners were harvested using 4 methods. Organ harvesting from prisoners incompletely executed by shooting, organ harvesting from prisoners after lethal injection, execution by organ explantation, so in other words, live organ harvesting, and finally organ harvesting under the pretext of brain death. The tribunal found China guilty of crimes against humanity beyond a reasonable doubt in its killings of prisoners to harvest and use their organs for transplant. The tribunal concluded that there is no evidence that China has dismantled its organ transplantation infrastructure or stopped forced organ harvesting. Let's summarize what we've learned. Kidney transplantation is a wonderful gift, but there is a dark side. Organ donation can be easily exploited in both subtle and egregious ways. A recent HRSA report found that some transplant centers in the United States were not adhering to protocol in selecting potential candidates for organ donation, which included harvesting organs from comatose patients who were still alive, i.e. had not met the legal definition of brain death. Organ trafficking around the world is a pervasive problem. It involves kidnapping people for organs or exploitation of the poor through selling of their organs. Many countries offer kidney transplants for purchase in the form of medical tourism, but this encourages the legal system of exploitation. If you've made it this far in the video, this quiz should be easy. Question number 1, what is brain death? That's correct. It's the permanent, irreversible, and complete loss of cerebral and brainstem function. So it's distinguished from a persistent vegetative state in which the person's alive and some autonomic functions or automatic functions, gag, cough, that sort of thing, remain. And it's distinct from coma in which some brain and bodily activity and function remains. So you can't take organs from someone who's comatose. You can only take organs from someone who has achieved complete brain death. Question number 2, what were the main findings from the July 2025 HRSA report on violations in transplant protocols in this country? Basically, they found that some programs were declaring people brain dead when they weren't really brain dead. In other words, they were willing to harvest organs from people who hadn't died based on inadequate neurological assessments, poor communication with medical teams, questionable consent procedures, and misclassification of causes of death, particularly in overdose-related cases. Question number 3, what is transplant tourism? That's right, traveling to other countries for the purpose of purchasing a kidney transplant. And you can just type in transplant tourism into the internet and you'll pull up companies that specialize in them, including this one, Medical Tourism Corporation, in business for 17 plus years and has an A plus rating on the Better Business Bureau. Question number 4, what country performs the most transplants around the world? That's right, China, and also has the most cases of abuse. Question number 5, where do most organs for transplantation come from in China? Basically, 3 groups, forced harvesting from prisoners, religious, and ethnic minorities. This concludes the August 2025 in-service for the Northwest Kidney Center. Thank you for your attention and recognition that while transplant is a great gift, we need to maintain the highest of ethical standards to preserve it as a moral treatment for kidney failure. This is Andy Brokenbrough signing out until next month. Thank you for listening.